to Insights and Perspectives, a program provided by the League of Women Voters of San Jose, Santa Clara. Today we're going to delve into the November 2020 California ballot propositions pros and cons. I'm Julia O'Keefe for the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. It does not support or oppose any candidates or political parties. While we do sometimes support or oppose a ballot measure after we've studied it, this presentation will be educational, presenting both sides of each issue. We'll explain the measures and give the pros and cons arguments. As many of you know, figuring out a ballot measure is not easy. First of all, you need to examine what the measure seeks to accomplish. Do you agree with the goal? Is it good government? Or will it cause problems needing court resolution? Does the measure mandate a government program or service without addressing how it will be funded? Does it create its own revenue source or obligate general fund revenues? If it uses the general fund, are these expenses that the state may have difficulty meeting in the short term? Does the measure deal with one issue that can be easily decided with a yes or a no vote? Or is it really a complex issue that should be thoroughly examined by the legislature? This last one is probably the most difficult. Who are the real sponsors and opponents of this measure? Be wary of distortion tactics and commercials that tell nothing about the measure. The propositions we're going to be looking at today can be calls for constitutional amendments, changes to state statutes, or they can be referendums to overturn existing statutes. They may have gotten on the ballot via the legislature or through the public. If you were maybe one of many people who signed a piece of paper out in front of a supermarket trying to put something on the ballot. That's called the initiative process. All of the propositions require a majority vote to win. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our two experts on the ballot propositions. We're going to be doing ballots issues 20 to 25. Connie Hunter and Pat Reardon. Connie?
Thank you, Julia. We're going to begin with Proposition 20. It restricts the parole for some offenses now treated as nonviolent, and it authorizes felony sentences for some now treated as misdemeanors. The question being posed is, should California law be amended to make changes to the process by which people are charged with certain crimes and the process for granting them parole?
Well, there's lots to consider on this proposition. So Connie and I are going to go back and forth with each one of the major criterias. First of all, let's talk about criminal penalties. Currently, convicted felons generally go to state prison, but they can go to county jail for less serious crimes with shorter sentences, or if they have no prior convictions.
If this proposition were passed, some crimes could be punishable by up to 3 years in jail. Others, now punished as misdemeanors, could be punished as felonies. Those are called wobblers.
And now moving on to community supervision practices. Currently, people released from prison for serious crimes are usually supervised by state parole agents. Other crimes and released prisoners are usually supervised by county probation officers. If the parole rules currently are broken, officers may ask the judge to change the terms of parole.
So if this proposition were passed, it would require probation officers to ask a judge to change the terms if the rules were violated by the convicted felon for a third time, requires state parole and county probation departments to exchange more information.
Now let's discuss the inmate release consideration process. Currently, some people in prison are convicted of primary crime, but they may be convicted at the same time with other more minor crimes as well. At this stage, they can be considered for release if the sentence for primary crime is completed without considering the sentence for the lesser crimes.
So if this proposition were passed, it would exclude some inmates from this process, and the parole board would be required to deny release if the person poses risk of committing felonies resulting in victims and various other provisions.
This proposition also addresses DNA collection by state and local authorities. Currently, DNA must be collected from adults arrested for felonies or youth who have committed a felony and people who are required to register as sex offenders or arsonists. At this time, we're collecting about 100,000 samples a year.
So if the proposition were passed, in addition to those that Pat just mentioned, we would also be required to collect it from adults convicted of certain misdemeanors, including shoplifting, forging checks, and certain domestic violence crimes.
So let's discuss the physical effects of Prop 20. State and local correctional costs would increase, likely in tens of millions of dollars annually. And state and local court-related costs could increase by more than several $1 million annually. State and local law enforcement costs will increase because of the increased number of DNA samples that are going to be collected annually.
The supporters of this proposition say that it reclassifies certain crimes, like assault with a deadly weapon, date rape, and child abuse, as violent. That expanded DNA collection helps solve serious crimes, and that furthermore, it closes a loophole in the law that now allows convicted prisoners to be released from prison early.
Now, the opponents of Prop 20 say that prison special interests want to scare you into spending tens of millions of dollars on prisons, which could force draconian cuts elsewhere in the state budgets. Prop 20 will result in extreme sentences for petty theft and will disproportionately impact vulnerable minorities. And that California already has severe and lengthy sentences for serious crimes.
So that concludes the discussion of Proposition 20, and we'll move on to Proposition 21, which expands the local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. The question being posed is, should current state law be changed to allow cities and counties to apply rent control to housing 15 years old or older, and limit rent increases to 15% once a new renter moves in?
So let's discuss the current situation. Several cities, including San Jose, have laws limiting how much landlords can increase rents for housing from one year to the next. And our courts have ruled that rent control laws must allow landlords to receive a fair rate of return. In other words, they have to receive some profit. Now, the current state Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act limits current rent control laws. Rent control laws cannot apply to single family homes or to housing built on or after February 1st, 1995. And they cannot control how much rent can be charged for a new renter when rental properties turn over from one renter to the next. The 2019 law limits rent increases to no more than 5% plus inflation in a given year, or 10%, whichever is lower. And it applies to most housing more than 15 years old and will last until January 1st, 2030.
So the proposal: cities and counties would be able to apply rent control to all housing that's older than 15 years. At the start of a new tenancy, it would allow the landlord to increase the rent by 15% over a period of 3 years. It exempts those landlords who own no more than 2 homes from the new policies. And again, it requires the landlord's right to fair financial return, putting past court rulings into state law.
So what are the fiscal effects? Less property taxes could be paid by landlord whose property value might decrease because of lower rents. Potentially more sales taxes could be paid by renters whose rent decreases and their expendable income increases. There could be changes in income taxes paid by landlords, and it could be both up and down. But overall, it would likely to reduce state and local revenues over time.
So what do the supporters of this proposition say? They say this is a vote to keep families in their homes, and that even small increases in rent sometimes force families into homelessness.
And the opponents say that Prop 21 undermines the strongest statewide rent control law in the nation, providing no protections for renters, seniors, veterans, or the disabled. And that rent control results in less available and less affordable housing in the long run.
All right, that concludes Proposition 21. So let's take a look at Proposition 22, which exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. The question is, should app-based rideshare and delivery drivers be classified as independent contractors rather than employees? And should rideshare and delivery companies be required to adopt labor and wage policies unique to these drivers?
So here's the current situation. Assembly Bill 5 passed in 2019, and it required drivers to be hired as employees who would get standard benefits equal to approximately 20% of pay at least minimum wage plus overtime, and allow breaks and paid time off if sick. Despite the passage of AB 5, rideshare and delivery companies continue to hire drivers as independent contractors. Drivers as independent contractors are paid a share of the fare or delivery charge customers pay. Most drivers probably make between $11 and $16 per hour after accounting for waiting time and driving expenses. But drivers still do choose when, where, and how much to work. They use their own cars, they pay their own expenses.
So what is being proposed? This proposition would reclassify app-based drivers as independent contractors unless a company sets their hours, requires them to accept certain rides or deliveries, or restricts working for other companies. No employee benefits and protections, but instead, it would guarantee that the drivers would receive at least 120% of the local minimum wage for the time they spend driving. It would help pay health insurance costs for those who drive more than 15 hours per week, pay medical costs when a driver is hurt while working. Furthermore, drivers would be limited to a 12-hour workday, and there would be provisions to prohibit discrimination, to develop sexual harassment policies, conduct criminal background checks, and mandate safety training. Finally, this proposition would limit local government from putting new rules on the companies.
So the fiscal effects of this proposition. This would allow companies to charge lower fares and delivery fees, since drivers would continue to be independent contractors and not employees. They could result in increased income taxes from drivers and shareholders. The increase in state income taxes, however, could be very minor.
So what do the supporters of Proposition 22 say? They say that it protects app-based drivers' choice to be independent contractors, that by a 4-to-1 margin, drivers support independence. Furthermore, classifying drivers as employees as required under AB 5 would lead to longer wait times, higher prices, and less access to rideshare and delivery services.
And the opponents say that No on 22 stops $1 billion app companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash from writing their own exemption to California law and profiting from it. Prop 22 would eliminate basic workplace protections and replace them with lower guaranteed earnings and healthcare subsidies to save costs for these big companies.
All right, so moving on to Proposition 23. Proposition 23 establishes state requirements for kidney dialysis clinics and requires on-site medical professional. The question being posed is, should outpatient dialysis clinics be required to have a physician on site at all hours when patients are being treated, offer the same level of care to all patients regardless of insurance, and report infection-related information?
So our current situation here is that in California, dialysis clinics have more than a $3 billion revenue annually, mainly paid by Medicare or Medi-Cal. If a patient has private health insurance, it is the primary payer for the first 30 months before transitioning to Medicare. The California Department of Public Health licenses and certifies the clinics under federal regulations, requiring each clinic to have a medical director who is a physician to oversee the work at various clinics. In practice, they are at individual clinics about 25% of the time. That's unique individual clinics. Clinics must now report infection-related information to a national network.
And Proposition 23 is proposing, in contrast to that clinics must have at least one licensed physician on site during the treatment hours. The California Department of Public Health can exempt if the clinic has a nurse practitioner or physician's assistant on site. The clinic must offer the same level of care to all patients and may not refuse care based on who pays for the care. The clinic must also report infection data to the California Department of Public Health, be published online, and penalties if they do not report. Finally, they must have state approval before closing or reducing services.
So let's discuss the fiscal effects of this particular proposition. If passed, the measure would increase costs for clinics by several thousands of dollars annually. Costs to state and local governments could increase in the low tens of millions of dollars annually due to higher employee medical costs that would be passed on. The California Department of Public Health would have increased administration costs in the low millions of dollars annually.
The supporters of this proposition say that dialysis is a dangerous procedure and that clinics should always have a doctor available to help. And it prohibits clinics from discriminating against patients because of the type of insurance they have in every clinic, no matter where they are located.
And the opponents say that Prop 23 would take thousands of doctors away from hospitals and emergency rooms, making California's doctor shortage even worse. Dialysis clinics are already strictly regulated and provide a very high quality of care.
All right, Proposition 24, amends of the consumer privacy laws. And the question being asked is, shall the 2018 California Consumer Privacy Act be amended to permit consumers to prevent businesses from sharing personal information, correct inaccurate personal information, limit the use of sensitive personal information, and create a new enforcement arm that would cost about $10 million annually, effective January 1st, 2023.
So let's talk about the current situation, which is effective January 1st, 2020. Large businesses are subject to consumer data privacy requirements to notify consumers of data collection and how they will use it, comply with personal data privacy rights, not to sell consumers data when requested, also to report to consumers the personal data that is collected about them, and some other regulations. They are also charged not to treat consumers who make use of their rights any differently than those that don't. Business penalties can be levied equal to or greater than $2,500 per violation, $7,500 if the violation is intentional, if they do not address their issues within 30 days. Businesses must protect from data breaches and tell people if their data were accessed in a breach. Currently, the California Department of Justice enforces consumer privacy and data breach laws.
So this proposition would permit consumers to opt out from businesses sharing as well as sale of personal information. Limit the use of sensitive personal information, including things like geolocation, race, religion, genetic data, sexual orientation, health information, and would allow the consumer to correct inaccurate information. It would increase penalties on companies that fail to follow the regulations, particularly for use of children's data, which would require parental opt-in. Only businesses that buy, sell, or share data from 100,000 individuals or households are subject to the rules. And finally, it would create a new enforcement arm, the California Privacy Protection Agency. Legislative changes would be permitted if they would strengthen privacy.
So the physical effects include $5 million for a one-time startup cost to set up the new California Privacy Protection Agency. There would be increased state costs from the general fund of at least $10 million annually to manage the new agency, and some increased state Department of Justice and court costs offset by some reductions due to work shifting to the new agencies, and those costs are not likely to exceed in the low millions of dollars annually.
The supporters say that this proposition will prevent businesses from using or sharing sensitive data about your health, finances, race, ethnicity, and precise location. Furthermore, it safeguards young people by tripling fines for violations involving children's information and not allowing disclosure of information known to be of a minor unless guardian agrees.
So opponents say that Prop 24 puts the burden on consumers to opt out of countless intrusive data collection practices one by one that companies are currently barred from by default. And there are some hidden economic discrimination. People without money to spend cannot pay for loyalty programs and can expect worse connections, slower downloads, and more pop-up ads.
All right, so our final proposition today is Proposition 25. It's a referendum on a law that replaced money bail with system based on public safety and flight risk. The question being asked, should the law enacted by the California legislature to replace the current money bail system be approved? So in this case, we the people are standing in place of the legislature because the bill that they passed has been challenged.
So currently, under the state constitution, people arrested and placed in county jail, except for certain felony crimes, have the right to release before trial. Now, that release can be on their own recognizance and promise to appear, or on bail, which is a financial guarantee that the person will appear. Most courts and counties use risk assessment tools based on research showing people with certain traits are more likely to commit a new crime or fail to appear. Some can be released, but required to obey certain conditions. Bail amount is determined by each trial court and generally returned if a person appears. Bail bond industry is regulated by the state.
This proposal is to require automatic release for most misdemeanors within 12 hours. Otherwise, a person would be assessed by a risk assessment tool that relies on criminal history, demographics, and or socioeconomic information. No bail would be charged. Most who were jailed would be released at arraignment. And finally, trial courts would be responsible for the assessment.
So the fiscal effects, there is some increase in workload for state trial courts, the DAs, the public defenders, and that would be offset by decreased workload for hearings and the amount of bail. And these costs would be in the mid hundreds of millions of dollars. It's assumed that county jail costs would decrease.
The supporters say that the current bail system is unfair. If you can't afford bail, you have to stay in jail. People who are eventually found not guilty or not even charged may be stuck with large debts to pay off the bail or the fees. Prop 25 means that decisions will be based on public safety and not on a person's ability to pay.
So the opponents to Prop 25 say that Prop 25 replaces the option to post bail with a new discriminatory system of computer-generated profiling. It will cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars a year, overburdening the courts and creating bureaucracy. And releasing people from jail will make our communities less safe.
Thank you, Connie and Pat. Remember, the general election is coming up November 3rd, and you must register in order to vote. You should register by the 19th, but you can register conditionally after that, right up to Election Day. Mail-in ballots will be sent out by around October 5th, and voting centers will open on October 31st. For more information on voting, the great source is the Voter's Edge, a project of the League of Women Voters of California, and MapLight. You'll find nonpartisan information on candidates, measures, and financing, as well as many links to other voter information and registration. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of San Jose, Santa Clara, thank you for being with us today. Be sure to register if you haven't and vote November 3rd. Thank you.